Okay, so book 2 is titled An Inappropriate Gathering. And it's a gathering at the monastery. And why are they gathering at the monastery? What's the real reason for gathering here? Anyone remember this? To see Zosima, but they want to do something with Zosima. Yeah, the goal is to kind of have a conversation with Zosima.
Isn't it Dmitri and Fyodor need to have a conversation on the money and who gets the money?
So they're still arguing over the basically Dmitri's inheritance, right? So I may have made reference to this last time. The parable of the prodigal son. Did I talk about? I did? Yes, right? So this is not, I think, a coincidence. Anyway, they're trying to settle that dispute, and they think Zosima will be a great judge of this. And so they want to have this conversation with Zosima, and it turns out that Dmitri doesn't show up, right? But along comes Yusov, and Yusov is, how is he related to people? He is sort of a cousin. He's
Dimitri's guardian,
right? He was, basically, which was a relative of his first, so Fyodor's first wife. And so he was the guy that almost fought in the revolution. That was the guardian, the guy that was taking care of Dmitri when Dmitri was young. He's a wealthy guy, as you see. And why is he coming to the monastery too? Why is he tagging along?
To see their lifestyle.
He wants to sort of see their lifestyle. There's one, not that this really matters too much, but it's just kind of
like fishing rights and hunting rights.
Yeah, it's like the property, basically like property rights, and the monks have property, and he actually technically owns the property, and I don't know how it all worked out, but anyway, he's there, and I think he plays a role in this part of the novel to serve as a juxtaposition. So he's there as an observer, as like in one real sense. But the way that he observes things is almost like he sees what he wants to see in there. You see him making these observations about the tombstones. You see him making observations about the bows and all this, and it's as if he knows exactly what that means before it even happens. Right? It's all just pious crap that he's like thinking is just full of it, and he knows that's the case prior to even making any observations. So I think there's something interesting about the fact that he also was he's kind of this figure of like a liberal figure in this political sense of like uprooting the traditions. He wants this other guy who's hardly a figure in the novel, Kolganov, who is mentioned in the first paragraph of the whole of chapter 1, and Yusov wants Kolganov to not study in Russia but to go somewhere else to kind of get a more up to date type of education. Anyway, so that's the reasons for gathering at the monastery, and there's a lot of ways we can run through these first couple books. Things that I want to talk about, which if you have questions on, feel free to ask questions on this. The things that I would like to talk about is why Fyodor is a buffoon, and the little discussion that he has with Zosima about his buffoonery, which is very intriguing. The discussion, as we were talking about in chapter 3 of the Women of Faith, and then in chapter 4, the discussion with Madame Holokhov about why she has doubts she suffers from lack of faith, and kind of that discussion, because it's going to bring us back to what I think I mentioned last time about ideology. Okay, so any questions about it? I mean, anything from the book, narrative-wise, anything that anyone has? We want to get worked out initially before we jump into these few details. They introduce some interesting concepts.
Was that little girl that was with the woman of faith, like the one that was, I'm guessing, kind of in a wheelchair?
Yep. Yeah.
But was the whole thing there with Alyosha, like that he like grew up with them and like knew that little girl?
Yeah.
And that's why.
Yep. So Alyosha, yeah, they knew each other prior, and he's trying to play it off like I'm a cool holy man now. I don't have time for girls smiling at me.
Okay, that's what I was understanding, but it was just kind of confusing how it was introduced. Because I was like, is this just like another like, oh, she's like lying?
Yeah.
Or...
No, and it comes up a little bit later in the novel too. It comes back. They're pretty central figures, I guess you could say, to the plot line. So, okay, but yeah, and that's the daughter of Madame Holokhov. Okay, so they get there, and Fyodor, not just here, but probably his whole life, he acts like a complete idiot. He's very disrespectful. Right. Why do you think he acts like this? Why does he start relaying all these crazy stories about East Pravnik and Napravnik, and talking to this I think it was a general's wife, and saying your wife is a ticklish woman, meaning, high honor and moral quality, and then like sort of that joke went south, and he kind of made a fool of himself. But anyway, why does he act like this? What's the there's a discussion as to why he acts like this. Anyone want to take a stab at that?
I think it keeps saying, so he's more agreeable, but I don't understand what that means.
Okay.
How being disagreeable is making him look better. So he's trying to make himself look dumber than he is.
Yeah. There's something like that to make himself more agreeable. I think, as he puts it, that's sort of his analysis of it.
I think he also says that everyone assumes him to be a buffoon, so he acts a buffoon because everyone assumes it of him.
Yeah. So everyone sort of thinks that he is this way, and so he sort of acts the part. Any other thoughts about this? This is a very
I think he likes to act like a fool, because then he's just acting as a fool the whole time, and then when he actually has a good idea, it seems like grander than it actually is.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, well, I've been such a fool this time. Look at this thing I did.
Yeah. It lowers the bar. Yeah, that's one way to think of it. Any other thoughts?
I don't know if this is exactly like Theodore, but I sometimes in conversations, depending on who I'm talking to, I actually won't talk about like more serious things or more things that are in depth or like things that are important to me, because I don't think it's going to be received well, or like also I don't know if they're going to have anything to say.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there is something about this fact. I think about my own life, and I know in situations where I feel myself being evaluated or judged or what have you, and there's a lot of tension associated with what are people going to think of me. One way to take control of the situation is to fully determine what people are going to think of me, and that's by being the class clown or whatever. It's kind of it's a way of being in charge in a sense, which gives a degree of comfort because now you're the one that's kind of in charge. And so I think there's this sense of comfort, the sense of, as Zosima puts it on this page 43, right? This is the Peever translation. Be at ease and feel completely at home, and above all, do not be ashamed of yourself, for that is the cause of everything. And he goes on to fill this in, and we'll read some of this. But I think that's the real the root of it is the unease with oneself and the fact that one can't be comfortable with oneself, and that's brought to our attention when we present ourselves to other people, right? So there's like this. You only play a role. You only act a buffoon in the eyes of other people, and that's because you're not comfortable with yourself when you're. It's like when you think most about yourself, or at least one of us think most about ourselves when we know that other people are thinking about us. And so I think there's something about why Fyodor's acting like this. And the real lesson isn't so much like the buffoonery aspect, but it's what drives him to that type of behavior. And so this is what I want to get to ultimately. This is on page 43, right after where I just read. Fyodor responds, completely at home. Right? This is you got to be careful with what you offer Fyodor, right? It says be completely at home, and so Fyodor responds, completely at home? You mean in my natural state? Oh, that is much too much. But I am touched and I accept. Blessed Father, you shouldn't challenge me to be in my natural state. You shouldn't risk it. I myself will not go so far as to be in my natural state. I'm warning you in order to protect you. He's like, you don't know what you're asking for, Reverend Father. Don't ask that. And so he doubles down on the buffoonery right now. You kind of see what's happening, right? He's being all the more. And then this is later on in that paragraph. This is where he talks about everyone takes you for the buffoon. So I say, indeed, let me play the buffoon. And then skip the page, and the great scene where he falls on his knees and he says, Teacher, what should I do to inherit eternal life? Obviously mocking the gospel there. And, as it says, it's hard to tell now whether he was joking or was indeed greatly moved. All right, so this is the funny thing about the Karamazovs. It's hard to tell whether they're sincere or they're not sincere. And maybe it's the case that we all have a mix of sincerity and insincerity, and that's why it's hard to tell. It's just magnified in Fyodor. Okay, the elder looked at him and said with a smile. So you can clearly see Zosima is not offended by this in the slightest. Where everyone else thinks that he should be offended, Zosima is not offended. Which is an important lesson to draw from. You've known for a long time what you should do. You have sense enough. Do not give yourself up to drunkenness and verbal incontinence. Do not give yourself up to sensuality, and especially to the adoration of money. And close your taverns. If you cannot close all of them, then at least 2 or 3. And above all, above everything else, do not lie. And then Fyodor once again kind of maybe playing the buffoon about Diderot, because he just told a lie about this story of the philosopher Diderot. And then here is, I think, one of the most insightful passages from this part of the book. I think this is an incredible sort of psychological moral insight, which is worth really reflecting on, and the ways this is true for all of us, because I think this is something all of us sort of partake in. No, not exactly about Diderot, Zosima says. Above all, do not lie to yourself. A man who lies to himself and listens to his own lies comes to a point where he does not discern any truth, either in himself or anywhere around him, and thus falls into disrespect towards himself and others. Not respecting anyone, he ceases to love. And having no love, he gives himself up to passions and coarse pleasures in order to occupy and amuse himself, and in his vices reaches complete bestiality. And it all comes from lying continually to others and to himself. A man who lies to himself is often the first to take offense. It sometimes feels very good to take offense, doesn't it? And surely he knows that no one has offended him, and that he himself has invented the offense and told lies just for the beauty of it, that he has exaggerated for the sake of effect, that he has picked on a word and made a mountain out of a pea. He knows all of that, and still he is the first to take offense. He likes feeling offended. It gives him great pleasure, and thus he reaches the point of real hostility. Don't get up from your knees and sit down, I beg you. These posturings are false too, right? So, and then once again, Fyodor responds with some more buffoonery. Blessed man, let me kiss your hand, and preciously. Right. So, but what is Zosima saying there? What does he mean? Don't lie to yourself, because when you lie to yourself, you can't distinguish the true from the false around you, and if you can't distinguish the true or the false, you lose respect, and when you lose respect, you can't love. If you can't love, then you give yourself into coarse pleasures and passions that occupy and amuse you, and yada yada yada. Anyone want to try to fill that in? Explain like what the heck is going on there? How that works?
Like lying to yourself about the sin you're committing. Like I know this is temporary, but I'll fix it later. It's just kicking it down the road.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's this one song called Miss Ohio.
Uh-huh.
And it's always like, I want to do right, but not right now.
Okay, yeah.
That lie, just constantly tell yourself that lie.
Yeah. Well, that's a good line. I like that. Yeah, I think there's something about that, about if you don't know. So we'll approach it from a slightly different angle, but I think that's true. If you don't know yourself well, then you don't really understand much about reality. And the reason that is, it's kind of like if you're an angry person and someone says something kind and you get pissed at them because they said it at the wrong time or this or that, like you're going to be, your encounter with reality is going to be a lie. And it's going to be a lie because you don't fully understand that the way that you are is like twisting and deviating and sort of perverting your embracing of it, right? And so I think there's something like this that's going on, that the origin of the knowledge of reality or the other it comes through an understanding of yourself. And it's a painful thing to think about, the ways in which we are failures, not always failures. That's not, I don't mean to be too sort of pessimistic, but to understand that is something we often don't want to do, and so we kind of kick that down the road. And when you kick it down the road, then you kind of are blinding yourself. Yeah, it's hard to really live life if you don't really understand yourself. I mean, this goes back to like some Platonic themes, right? The unexamined life is not worth living type stuff. Yeah.
Would you say that when most people lie to themselves, they know it's a lie, or do you think actually, like in their heart, they think that's the truth? Because I think that almost like harps, like an insecurity. Like one of the reasons insecurities are so bad is because like you actually believe that thing is true about yourself, even when it's not reality.
Yeah.
So in your heart, it's not a lie, even if. So I guess that's where like self-reflection comes in. But yeah, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Do people know they're lying to themselves. I think we can. I think when the lie's going well, we don't want to know. It's like when you lie to other people, you don't want them to know you're lying to them, because then the lie doesn't work. It doesn't get really a good grip. Like if I want to think of myself as a very humble person, I can do that. I can think of myself as a humble person, but it's taken about 35 years or so to realize that the ways that I think of myself as humble are largely just misinterpretations of like hidden, like prideful arrogance. And it's like, the only reason I want to be humble is so that other people can know that I'm humble. And the only reason I don't like say things that I could say and point out, look, oh, I did all these awesome things, is that I hope they'll find out in some other way. And they'll find out, well, Jagger didn't talk about how awesome he was. And we found out this other way, that he's so humble and he's so awesome. Right? And so anyway, but I don't want to, like, I think it's after like, I don't know, like 30 years of I probably have been reflecting for 30 years, probably 30 days. Like, the more that I start to know myself, the more I realize like it's hard for me to feel good about myself in those deceptive avenues, those deceptive ways, and yeah, I don't know, and so then it's kind of hard to just accept. I don't mean this in like just a don't worry about becoming a better person type of thing, but to accept myself as I am. It's like I wish that I was some other way, and so we tend to lie to ourselves because we have a discomfort with what we are, and we kind of know that in one sense. I mean, I'm sure there's like some like deep psychology that can be had here about like subconscious stuff, because in one sense we kind of have this inclination, but yet we want to tell ourselves stories that's not true about us, and so we kind of it's like a memory. If you have a memory about something in the past, it's amazing how replaying that memory in different ways can kind of change the memory, such that at a certain point you cease to remember what really was true or not. And I think that's a real possible phenomenon that can occur. The stories we tell ourselves can cover the ways in which we really are.
And I think with what you're saying too, I think sometimes people tell themselves the same thing over and over so much that it does become true. Like the lies very deeply rooted.
Yeah.
In your identity.
Yeah. And then to give that up would be like, what would I be without thinking of myself in this way?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This is more random, I guess, but my friend who's a nurse, there was this lady that they encountered. She like had like a child in her arms and like was like crying about it and everything. But they actually think she's the one that killed it. So it's like she's lying to herself, and that's insane.
Yeah.
But, yeah, it's good.
It goes back to what we said on the first day of class, that the way, like, we often are, maybe more often than not, are the source of our own unhappiness. It's like, why do we do this to ourselves? Okay. Last little thing about this, then we got to move on to some other things. Is the point that we love to take offense. It feels very good to take offense. Any thoughts on that? Is that true, do you think? It sometimes feels very good. A man who lies to himself is often the first to take offense. It sometimes feels very good to take offense, doesn't it? And surely he knows that no one has offended him, and that he himself has invented the offense and told lies just for the beauty of it, that he has exaggerated, yada, yada. He likes feeling offended. It gives him great pleasure. And that's where the real hostility comes in. So what does that mean? Do you think that's true? Any instances or examples of that in kind of bring that to flesh?
It kind of like, whenever like anyone is offended like, yeah, it makes you like sad in some ways, but then in other ways it's like, well, you try to convince yourself that whatever you're offended of isn't true. So then like you build yourself up in your mind, but then the person who said that thing, they couldn't possibly be right.
Yeah.
Like they couldn't possibly have spoke like a truth into like how you're acting.
Yeah.
But they're wrong. You know, so like in that sense you kinda like build yourself up so then you feel better about yourself.
Yeah.
Rather than them, and you make them out to be the villain.
You play the martyr.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even if you're actually
Yeah, even if and you might be the one that's like responsible
Yeah.
for like thinking of them as the villain, and so you're the one that's doing real harm because they didn't harm you in the first place.
Yeah, I feel like I did that all the time, like middle school.
Mm.
But that's sort of, but it's like you make them whoever or whatever you're blaming responsible for everything, so nothing's your fault. You didn't mess up at all. It was because they did something. So
Yeah.
now you're there like
Yeah.
nothing I can do.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you're not responsible for anything. When you're not responsible for anything, then it seems that the best you could do with offense is self-pity. And then you just wallow in self. Does he talk about that? It sort of licenses you to wallow in self-pity. And then the thing about self-pity is it's a party. It's a pity party, right? And who doesn't love a good party? All right. So I think that is certainly an aspect, and it's a really, in my own experience, it's a really unhealthy way of finding pleasure, because it's all just sort of like fantasy built up in your head, all right? And now I think this is what we saw at the opening scriptural passage from last class about the man who is angry in his heart or who lusts in his heart has committed that. And it's like here, there's no offense that's been done by this person, but if you sort of take offense in that, it's as if you're you're recreating them into a villain. No, that sounds kind of cartoonish, but you're recreating them into someone that's done harm. You're making harm in your head, and that is sort of to recreate the world with the context of evil.
You said it's like being a sports fan.
How so?
You create this fantasy, if you're from Miami, you're a Miamian, whatever.
Yeah.
Not a Dolphin. You're
Yeah.
a Miami Dolphin.
Yeah.
But you associate yourself so much from my dad was or whatever.
Yeah.
You create this whole storyline and you hate all the other teams.
Yeah. Oh, you're from. You're from.
I'm from South Carolina.
South Carolina. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And so then, I think there's something, and we kind of I mean, the thing about sports is it's sort of fake resentment. At least some people take it seriously, really seriously. But it's oh, you guys beat us last game, and I hate you guys. And it's all, hopefully it's all left at the level of fun. But sometimes but we do take enjoyment and even in the fact that maybe not initially, but down the road of it provides excitement. It provides purpose in a way. Even to lose sometimes gives a sense of purpose, which is something I think worth thinking about. Okay, so another thing I want to talk about is this passage on page 48, which when Zosima leaves the conversation, because the conversation's not really going anywhere, they're waiting for Dimitri, and so he leaves to go talk to these peasant women. And he goes to a bunch of them. He talks to this one woman who is grieving the loss of her last son. And her last son, Nikitushka, has died just short of 3 years old. Not actually too far from the age of my twins right now. And what's interesting about this fact, as Dostoevsky wrote it, anyone read the little footnote in this translation?
That's the age at which his son died.
That's the age at which his son died. And what does he title this son in the book? Alexei. And what was his son's name? Alexei. And what's the main character in here's name? Alexei. So there's also a character that comes up at the end of this. There is a little girl that one of the peasant women's holding, and what's that little girl's name? Lisaveta. And what's the little crippled girl in the wheelchair? Lisa, which is like short for, I believe, Lisaveta. Anyway, there's a lot of similarities in names. Once again, over the course of the whole novel, try to keep in mind that first original fact that I tried to point out, that we're all sort of the same genealogy. We all find our roots back here. So I think there's a way in which this is done in the writing of the book. There's a lot of interconnections. It's like a dense soap opera, right? That everything kind of gets woven together. Okay, so this little son has died. The mother goes completely crazy and doesn't want to remember. This is on top of 49. I've forgotten everything. I don't want to remember. What can I do with him now? I'm through with him. I'm through with everybody. And I don't even want to see my house now, my things. I don't want to see anything at all. Why doesn't she want to see anything at all? Because everything reminds her of her son. So this is a painful thing, the fact that everything she sees reminds her of her son. And so she doesn't want to remember that because it causes so much pain because she realizes she doesn't have her son. And one of the things that I think is important is that the pain or suffering, we'll call it, is obviously painful. It's obviously unpleasant. But there's this question of whether it is good. Is it to be avoided? There's a part of us that wants to avoid all pain and all suffering. But what I think Zosima is trying to point out, and what's going to be pointed out throughout the novel, is there's an aspect of reality that can only be revealed through pain, the experience of pain and the experience of suffering. So there's something about yourself, there's something about reality, about others, that you won't ever fully understand unless you deeply experience pain and suffering. And it doesn't necessarily have to be purely physical. It could be emotional, it could be psychological, it could be a type of moral pain and suffering. But the idea is this is a very human access point to reality. And many of us find it too difficult to bear that, and so we try to avoid reality. We want to forget it. We want to live in our thoughts, or we sort of medicate with other drugs that will keep us from really having to be reminded of the reality that's being presented through pain and suffering. And the way that Zosima goes on to talk about this is he initially tries to comfort her, and he says, all good consolers, don't worry, your little one is with God, everything's going to be okay, he's there, he's with the angels, rejoice, don't weep, your infant now abides with the Lord and the most of his angels, and therefore too, know that your infant surely now stands before the throne of God. He's trying to comfort her with these great thoughts. And what does this woman respond? How does she respond to that? You're just like my husband and just like everyone else that tried to comfort me. And Zosima then realizes what she needs is not consolation, right? She doesn't need consolation. Really what she needs is time. it's as he puts it here on page 50. This is the lot that befalls you, mothers on earth. You should not be comforted. Do not be comforted, but weep. Right. So there are for certain people, the best thing for them is not to have that pain and that suffering removed, but it's to actually endure it, to have the strength to endure it. Because he says, only each time you weep, do not fail to remember that your little one is one of God's angels. He looks down from heaven on you. And you will be filled with this great mother's weeping for a long time, but in the end it will turn into quiet joy for you. And your bitter tears will become tears of quiet tenderness and the heart's purification, which saves you from sin. So I think there's something about the fact that if you can linger with the pain and the suffering long enough, there's like a whole new world that's opened up to you through that, and I think what it shows is something about the depth of love. Because what would consolation? It's like when my kids fall and they scrape their knee, and I try to get them to stop crying. I try to console them. What do I do to console them? I give them an M&M, and the M&M is better than the what they lost, which was like a little bit of like ease in their knee. But now they lost that ease in their knee. That nice feeling in their knee is now gone. They have a bad feeling in their knee. But the M&M is like a greater good, which is why they can be consoled by it. Does that make sense? It's like, at least a lot of kids are like, yeah, I'd probably, if I could get a popsicle every time I'd scrape my knee, I'd probably scrape my knee more often, right? Because, and so it's a type of consolation. It's like a trade-off. And I think what Zosima is coming to here with this woman is there's nothing that could console you. You've like lost everything of any value to you. So consolation is not possible for you. You can't be consoled. And the point isn't to be consoled. The point is to see that what is sort of the most, I'll call it the most evil aspect of your life right now is capable of being, we'll just kind of do it like this, sort of transfigured into one of the greatest goods. And now that's not something you can understand from the outside. You have to understand it from the inside, the internal experience of how the greatest evil can become the greatest good in your life. The things that are worst in people's lives often are like central in the story as to why they are saints, right? No saint is a saint who didn't have sin at the heart of their conversion story, right? Even I think Saint Therese thought of herself as the greatest sinner. I think she says that. Okay, so that's an important theme throughout the whole book. It's the question of suffering, the question of evil. And one of the things we see is it's tempting to want to run from it, but to run from it is to actually run from what it puts you on the path towards, which I think as you find here, a real understanding of the depth of the love that the mother has for the son. If she could be consoled by those words, it would be as if the son didn't mean that much to her. Right? It's like my kid being consoled by M&Ms because, yeah, scraping my knee is not that big of a deal. Okay, we didn't get to Madame Holocaust and why she is doubtful about immortality, but we're going to talk about that at the start of next class because it's a really important passage. This is on page 55 and 56, when Zosima talks about active love. So we'll start with that, and then we'll move into the next reading.